Neil, are we going to record this?
I've just started it. Yeah.
Yeah. And welcome also to our speakers, Adrian Arnulf and Scott Nooner, and thank you and thank them for accepting our invitation. And as you probably have joined other meetings, we are recording this presentation, and we will stop the recording once the question and answer part of the seminar starts, and the recordings will be posted on YouTube and other sites, and it will be announced on the seminar's website. And as a reminder of rules, please, I ask everyone attending, please keep their microphones muted to avoid the interruptions. And today we have two speakers, so we're gonna keep all questions until the end of the second talk to facilitate the seminar. And if possible, please type your questions in the chat tool, and you can either type your full question and we will read it, or you can just indicate that you have a question and we will go order by order and call you to make the question. So as I said, I have two speakers today, and it's my honor to present the first speaker is Dr. Adrian Arnulf. Dr. Arnulf received his PhD degree in geophysics in 2011 at the Institut de Physique du Globe de Paris in France. He was a Cecil and Ida Green postdoctoral fellow at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and currently he's an assistant research professor at the Institute for Geophysics at the University of Texas, Austin, where he has been since 2015. Adrian specializes in the area of seismology with particular emphasis on the development and implementation of computer-intensive data processing and modeling algorithms for marine seismic imaging. In his research, he investigates processes along mid-ocean ridges and convergent margins, and today he will present his recent research on the subsurface structure of Axial volcano. Following Dr. Arnold's presentation, we will have Dr. Scott Nooner. And Scott Nooner received his PhD degree in geophysics in 2005 at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. He has been a research scientist at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, and currently he's an associate professor of geology at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where he has been since 2012. Scott specializes on measuring and modeling the deformation of the Earth's crust in a variety of land and marine environments, including mid-ocean ridges and continental rifts. He's also a leader in the field of developing instrumentation and techniques for measuring the formation of the seafloor. And related to this field, today he will be presenting a review of the decades-long and ongoing geodetic monitoring of Axial volcano. So as you know, these two talks are, have a common topic of on Axial volcano, and I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, I'll give the presentation to Adrian to start his talk. Adrian.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo, and thank you for the committee of this symposium for inviting me today. And I will report today some imaging that has been done in the past few years at Axial Seamount. And this is the work that I and many others have been doing or are currently working on. So like first, as an introduction, I would like to present this map of the global topography on Earth. So with land masses and also oceans or under the oceans. And one of the key features on our planet is this long series of topographic high, which is located in the middle of most oceans and which form the global mid-ocean ridge system. And it corresponds to a 65,000 kilometer long series of spreading centers where more than 70% of the Earth volcanism occurs. And one place that I will focus on today is the Juan Fuca Ridge, which is an intermediate spreading center, which is located in the Northeast Pacific west of the United States and Canada. I guess I have to click. So this is just a summary of like the structure of the oceanic crust at intermediate and fast-spreading ridges. And this is the typical Penrose model where you have a layered cake of extrusive, which is on top of dikes and gabbros. This forms the oceanic crust, which is on top of the oceanic mantle. And on the right, you have like the typical like thickness of the different section of the oceanic crust. And one other thing I would like to point out is on the left image, the magma chamber here, which is kind of a schematic view here. It looks like an orange blob. And there is still like a lot of debate about like how like magma is stored in the oceanic crust or in volcanoes in general, and how like magma channels from the upper mantle all the way like to the surface. And those are like questions that I want, like, or features that I want to study today and present. Another aspect of oceanic crust is that there is a very significant difference in porosity when you move from the extrusive basalt or pilobasalt, which is quite porous, deep into like the dike section and finally gabbro section. And you see that gabbros are much less porous than basalt. So this leads to the next slide, which is about like the oceanic crustal structure that has been reported based on seismic measurement. So on the left plot here, you have a typical depth versus velocity plot for the oceanic crust. And one of the key features in the oceanic crust is the sharp increase in velocities, which is represented here by the colors, at the base of one layer defined as layer 2A. So here you see you go from roughly like 2 kilometers per second to like 5 or 6 kilometers per second in a very thin depth interval. So this leads to a very sharp gradient. And this is shown by the second colors, like in the green to purple colors here. And the warmer the color shows you that there is a big increase in velocities with depth. And the origin of this layer 2A to B boundary has been debated for over a few decades, whether it's a lithological boundary within the oceanic crust, so the transition between pilobasalt and sheeted dikes, or if it's a porosity limit within the extrusive section, which is associated with hydrothermal alteration or fracturation fronts. So this is one thing that I would like to address in this presentation. In this next slide here, it's a summary of the typical seismic imaging that has been done at mid-ocean ridges. So this is for two segments of the Juan de Fuca ridge, just to the north and to the south of axial seamount or axial segment. So the top plot is a long axis of the Endeavour segment. So this is the work of Van Ark in 2007, and the bottom two plots are from the cleft segment. And this is the work of Canales and colleagues in 2009. And what you can see from those seismic reflection images is that there are just a few reflectors that have been imaged at mid-ocean ridges. So the first one is the seafloor, which is basically the bottom of the ocean and the beginning of the oceanic crust. The second one is the base of layer 2A, which is this sharp reflector or like bright reflector a little bit deeper in the crust. The third one is the axial magma chamber. So along axis, it might correspond to a long or like a pattern that you can track along the ridge axis, but across axis, it will correspond to like a point or like a very like narrow reflector. And finally, in places, sometimes we can image the moho. And another aspect of most images so far is that it has been done and processed in the time domain. So most of these images, the vertical axis is in time. So those images are stretched and don't represent the exact geometry of the oceanic crust. And one thing that I would like to show is that we can do better by using advanced tools such as full waveform immersion these days. And we can not only like produce like reflectivity image of the crust, which are really good at representing boundaries, but also combine that with the velocity information in very sharp and well-defined velocity images using waveform inversion. So now this is a like the location map for axial seamount. So axial is part of the axial segment, which is one of the 7 segments of the Juan de Fuca Ridge. So you go from north with West Valley, and they have a northern symmetry, coaxial, axial vents and cleft. And axial is located at the intersection of the Juan de Fuca Ridge and the Cobb-Ekeberg seamount chain. And the current position of the Cobb seamount is just under axial volcano. So this is a view of axial volcano. It has been studied for over 2 or 3 decades. There have been repeated seismic experiments on top of this seamount. The first one was a tomographic experiment by West et al. In 2001. So it's this black cube or square that you can see on the biggest outline. It produced a large tomography model of this entire region. Then later on in 2002, there was another seismic survey that was conducted and acquired several 2D seismic lines. And in the summer of 2019, we also acquired a 3D seismic volume of data that I will show you in the next few slides. Oh, and one thing also is that there is a horseshoe caldera, like on top of the volcano. And this volcano has erupted like multiple times in the past like 2 decades. So in 1998, so the outline is in yellow here. 2011, it's in cyan color, and 2015, it's in green. There are also hydrothermal fields that are located all around the subsiding caldera. And we image 2, and you will see in the later portion of this talk that we image, in fact, like more magma reservoir in the crust beneath these seamounts. So here we have the main magma reservoir and the secondary magma reservoir in the eastern shoulder. So those are like results from waveform inversion. So those like high resolution velocity model that I talked about like in one of the earlier slides. And this is a perspective view of the volcano looking from along the southern reef zone, and then you can see the northern reef zone on the background or the far field. So I can cut through those 2D slices, and what you see is like the velocity, 2 velocity profiles along a transect that's across the caldera and one that is along the eastern shoulder. And what you can see is that there are 2 low velocity anomaly at depth. So one associated with the main melt reservoir and one associated with the secondary magma reservoir here on the eastern shoulder. And this, you can see it also like from a 3D tomography model. So if you look at the depth slide here at 1.85 kilometer below the seafloor, you see the contour of this long or elongated main magma reservoir, and on the eastern shoulder, we have this elongated also low velocity anomaly that correspond to the secondary magma reservoir. And if you look at a dashed line that's cutting through those 2 perpendicular sections, you obtain this section here on the bottom right, where you can see the contour or the outline of the 2 magma reservoirs. So we know that there is some melts at depth, and it's stored in multiple reservoirs. So this is some earlier work that was published in 2018, and I will show you like more slices through this volume. So we can come towards us and look at the velocity through another profile. You see that the thickness of this feature is roughly 1 kilometer. So it is a thick magma reservoir as compared to a typical magma reservoir along mid-ocean ridges, which are expected to be 50 to 100 meters thick. We have also like these beautiful features that is associated with the collapse of the caldera. So you see that the low velocity, so the blue colors here, are deeper within the caldera than outside of the caldera. So this is another slide, again, like the magma reservoir, the collapse of the caldera. The magma reservoir extend further to the southeast of the opening of the caldera. Then we escape the main magma reservoir, but we're still in the secondary magma reservoir when we're on the eastern shoulder. And when we can also look at the velocity section by looking at the gradient. So this is what's shown here. And again, like when you are moving towards warmer colors, you are like in a region where you have a very sharp increase of velocity with depth. And what you can see is that the shallow crust is very well layered. Then you have like a 200-meter thick layer of high velocity gradient, and then you are like in a more homogeneous layer where the gradient is much reduced. So what's our interpretation here is that the upper part is layering through the extrusive section. These 200-meter thick layers of high velocity gradients is the base of layer 2A, and then you move towards the dike section. And you can see the continuity of this layering across the entire volcano. Another interesting point is that you can pick the thickness of layer 2A for the entire volcano, and what you see is that layer 2A is the thinnest on top of the seamounts in a place where the crustal thickness is the thickest. So it tells you one thing, that like most of the crustal thickening at axial seamount is due to the crystallization of gabbros or the presence of dikes at depth. So most of this extra crustal thickness is due to gabbros. Here you can also see the collapse of the caldera and the associated like inward and outward dipping fault beneath the subsurface. So again, our interpretation is that the upper part is the extrusive basalt. Then we have a transition region that corresponds to this high velocity gradient region. So it's a transition between extrusive and sheeted dikes. Then the region with much more homogeneous and low gradients is the sheeted dike. And the conclusion that we can draw from this, from those observations is that there are two elongated north-northwest subsurface magma reservoirs. We can compute partial melt up to 66%. So this is using the differential effective medium theory. The volume of melt is 33 to 60 cubic kilometers. And this is based on the alignment of, on the fact that 75% of the basaltic melt is stored in spheroidal inclusion that are less than 1/10. So it's a long crack or elongated crack. And the dimension of this main magma reservoir is roughly like 14 kilometer long, 4 kilometer wide, and 1.3 kilometer thick at its thickest points. So how does it compare with other magmatic systems? So if we compare that to Sophia Hills in Montserrat, which has like a 4 cubic kilometer melt volume, and the depth is 5.5 to 7.5 kilometer, we see that at axial seamounts, there is more melt stored, and the depth of the magma chamber is much more shallow. For a Newberry volcano in Oregon, we have like a lower melt volume, but possibly up to 60 cubic kilometer, and the depth of the magma chamber is 3 to 6 kilometer. And finally, for the Yellowstone magmatic system, we have two magmatic system that stores like both like 900 cubic kilometers, and the depth of those two magma reservoirs is 7+ kilometers and 22 kilometers. So as a general comparison, axial seamount is roughly similar to other volcanic system at plate boundaries, but it might be very small as compared to a large magmatic system of at intraplate volcanism, such as the Yellowstone. One advantage of full waveform inversion also is that, or elastic FWI in general, is that it yields absolute value of crustal elastic parameters. So when you have VP, VS, and density, you can derive bulk modulus, shear modulus, and density. And what we see is that layer 2A, so the extrusive section, has lower bulk modulus and shear modulus, or in other words, it's more compliant than the stiff layer 2B. So mechanically, they are very different, and their density is also different. So we can estimate that from the elastic full waveform inversion. Another thing we can do from the velocity is use the differential effective medium theory. So in that theory, you have two end members. So in this case, you have basalt and water, and depending on different inclusion that you are using, so spheres or elongated crack, you can have a relationship between P wave velocity and porosity. So what you can see here from spherical inclusion is that the velocity section will require a lot of porosity in excess of 70%. So this is unrealistic, but if we use vertically aligned crack, you see that very quickly the porosity that estimated from velocities is more feasible. So this is for 1/10, so 10 vertically and 1 horizontally, 1/20, 1/50, 1/100, and what you can see in the realistic field, so 1/20 to 1/100, is that the porosity of layer 2A is between 8 and 15% in general. It can be as high as like 30 or 25% in the very shallow crust. And this is very similar to gravity measurements that have been done at axial seamounts. Whereas the porosity of layer 2A is much lower, so it's 1.6 to 3.3%. So now in the rest of this presentation, I will show you some results from the recent 3D survey that we acquired in 2019. So this is the extent of the volume that we have acquired. So pay attention to the north location here. So this points to the north. We have this U-shaped caldera. The north reef zone is shown here by the dashed black line, and the south reef zone is shown here by the other dashed black line. What I refer to the southeast shoulder is this broad region southeast of the caldera. We have the extent of the 1998 lava flows, 2011 lava flows, and 2015 lava flows which are color-coded. And finally, the hydrothermal vents are shown here by those magenta circles. And you have like 3 main fields along the edges of the caldera, but there is also a very interesting vent field that has been discovered when the OI cable, so the cable that is laid on the seafloor and that's connected to all the instruments on the summit of Axial Seamount, was laid on. It was cut initially by like the new demand hydrothermal vent field that sits on the eastern edge of our 3D box. So what I'm doing here is that I rotate this volume, and I will show you slides along along those inlines. So I will show you various sections moving from towards us, towards the background of this figure. So I'm going to start. So on the western shoulder, you see that there is not much reflectivity, but as soon as we will approach the caldera, you see that there is a large volume of reflective material that is located just beneath the subsiding caldera. So in places, the extent of this bell-shaped reflector can be 24 kilometers long. So this is about the length of the Manhattan Island. And there is roughly like 1 kilometer, or like sometimes a lot more reflectivity in terms of thickness. What you can see also in places that there is like beneath these very bright reflectors that marks the top of the main magma reservoir, you will observe some layers or like a column of reflectivity that is located beneath this main reflector. So in this region, you have a lot of reflectivity that's located just underneath this top reflector. And it's similar on the other extent of the magma chamber, where you have a column of seals that's located beneath this sharp reflection from the top of the magma chamber. So now we're exiting the main magma reservoir, and we're approaching another magma reservoir that's located on the eastern shoulder. So you saw that there is this bell shape that overlays another column of seal. So again, you have this bell shape here, and then there is a bright column of seals that's located beneath its center. Now we're exiting this other magma reservoir, and we will move towards this region where On the flank of the north freeze zone, we see another bright reflection, which also overlay layers of bright reflectors. So again, here you have a bright reflection, and then there is a column of seals just underneath. Then we're moving towards the extent of coaxial segment. So this is the extent of coaxial segment. And what you can see is that there is a small reflectors that correspond to the magmatic system of the coaxial segment. And finally, under the new Demon vent field, we see like another bright reflector. So it's a very distinct magma reservoir. And it also overlay like, another column of seals. So I'm gonna go back to the end. You see that there is a bright reflection and that there is a column of seals underneath. So what I'm gonna do next is rotate the volume and look at cross line. So profiles along the other, a perpendicular section. So when we approach New Demon vent field here, we are approaching again this bright reflection, and you will see the column of seals underneath. Then I showed you like on the eastern shoulder, there was another bell-shaped reflector. So this is what you can see here in the perpendicular direction. And when you approach its center, you will see that there is it overlays a very bright column of seals. So here we are above the column of seals. So you have the summit of this outer magma reservoir, and then there's a column of seal underneath. If we move even further, like towards the caldera, you see that there is another bell-shaped reflectors that also overlays a column of seals, and this one is associated with the main magma reservoir. So I'm going to pause in a few seconds. So you see that there is these bell-shaped reflectors that we also witness in the perpendicular direction that overlays this column of seal. Then when we move towards the center of the caldera, like the reflectivity is more complex, and this is partially due to the fact that we're migrating the data currently in the time domain, and this section is vertically stretched. So there is a lot of improvement we can do still with the 3D imaging. So here again, you see on the northern extent of the main magma reservoir, we have another column of seals, and we are also approaching this magma reservoir that's located on the shoulder of the North Reef zone. And that reservoir is also associated with a column of seals underneath. So now I'm showing you like a perspective view. So you have like inline slices, cross-line slice, and also time slice. And I want to point out some of the reflection or reflectors that I've just discussed in the previous two movies. So the first one is, I kept like mentioning like bell-shaped reflectors. So it's these bell-shaped features that we have seen for various, for at least 3 of the different magma reservoirs. So there is the one associated with the magma reservoir that's located on eastern shoulder, and then there is also the one that's associated with the magma reservoir located beneath New Demon vent field. And then you have the contour of the magma reservoir that lies beneath the caldera. So this is the main magma reservoir. So if I crop through this 3D volume, you can see the extent of those features. So we have these bell-shaped reflectors that you can trace along various cross lines. And if you rotate that volume, you see that that those reflectors are tied together. So when I say like a bell-shaped reflector, it's truly a bell-shaped reflector in 3 dimension. And at its center, what you observe is that there is a bright column of seals. So both for this magma reservoir on the eastern shoulder and as well as on underneath the magma reservoir that's located beneath New Demon. Now, if I cut through this 3D volume along this dashed white line, I will show you like section along the main magma reservoir, and you can see that there is again this very long bell-shaped reflection that overlays in places those very bright column of seals. So both in the northern part, but also in the southeastern part of the of the caldera. So our interpretation are as follows. So these bell shape correspond to the extent of the mush zone. So it's the region that where melt is between 1 and 35%. So it's the higher crystallinity region. The top of the magma chamber, so this very bright reflection correspond to the melt-rich region. So the region where melt is higher than 35%. And finally, we believe that those very sharp reflection that forms column of seals beneath some portion of the magma reservoir correspond to or are associated with porous flow and mush compaction. So in other words, you have a region where melt fraction might increase due to the migration of like magma or melt. So if you further rotate this volume, you can again look at the interpretation I just mentioned. And we believe that there are evidence of porous flow in different locations, but not everywhere along the magma reservoir. Now, if you again look at inline slices, you see that the top of the magma chamber varies very quickly. So the depth to the top of the magma chamber varies along the axis. And if the depth to the top of the magma chamber reflects a balance between magma input from below and hydrothermal cooling from the top, you see that those processes varies over very short distances. And finally, like in these last slides of the presentation, I would like to show you time slices to look at some of those fractures that we image in the shallow crust. So if you look at those 6 different time slices, so they go from shallow depth on the left to a greater depth or greater time on the right. What you can see is that here we're cutting through the edges of the caldera, but we also see in places some additional fault that lays a little bit further out, as well as at greater depth. It's very hard to see here, but we have also like some fractures that are associated to the eruption fracture from the 2015 eruption. But from a time slice, it's pretty difficult to analyze the location of those fractures, but through advanced study of this reflectivity volume, you can extract the texture matrix, and it helps you like outline some of those features. So in places we see the contour of the caldera, but we also image those extra fractures that lays further out. And at certain location, we can see those fractures that are associated with the 2015 eruption flow. And you can overlay like those two volumes to have a better outline of the fractures on your reflectivity section. So this is some current work, but I'd say like we stop this analysis because we want to have like a depth migrated volume before continuing the analysis of fractures within the upper crust of the volcano. So this is my summary slide, is just to summarize the location of the different magma reservoirs. So the first one is this long magma reservoir that lies beneath the summit caldera. There is another one that's located beneath the eastern shoulder. It is also overlap. I mean, it's also characterized by a very sharp reflection at its summit and a column of seals underneath. There is the newly discovered magma reservoir that sits beneath New Demon. So again, you see this bell shape and this column of seals underneath. There are also very interesting reflectivity in this region where you have like kind of a fan distribution of reflectors. You have the contour of the the reflection associated with coaxial, and then like the one that's associated with the North Rift zone. And I will stop here and let Scott discuss some of the geodetic work at Axial Seamount.
Thank you, Adrian. Very nice results. So yes, let's move now to the second part of the seminar. And Scott, now you can start sharing your screen.
Okay, is that visible? Can you see that?
It is, yes.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and start then. Let me put a little laser pointer on here. Okay, so I'm just going to give a summary of the geodetic history at Axial Seamount from the 80s until now. And along the way, I'll talk about some of the improvements in techniques, some of the new instruments and that we've been able to make use of, and then also some of the results that we have seen along the way, and including the some really recent stuff right at the end. So a lot of people have helped out with this work as well. So I'll go ahead and move on. I won't spend much time on this. Adrian did a pretty nice job orienting us to where we are. Of course, this is the Juan de Fuca plate. The Cascadia subduction zone is over here on the right side of this figure. So this is a nice little map. If we zoom in on Axial, we can see this horseshoe-shaped caldera, the North Rift Zone and the South Rift Zone, like Adrian was showing. We've also seen, as Adrian mentioned, eruptions that resulted in extrusive volumes on the seafloor, extrusive basalts in 1998, 2011. Those two were both on the South Rift Zone. And then in 2015 was the most recent eruption along the North Rift Zone. And you can see that the southern part of the caldera rim is not visible. It's obscured by lava flows. And so we have some pretty good evidence that the southern rift zone has been a lot more active in terms of eruptions than the North Rift Zone over the last several hundred to several thousand years. The deformation at Axial Seamount began in the 1980s using bottom pressure recorders. And we call these Bprs for short. And it was not a fully continuous record of bottom pressure. And what I mean by bottom pressure is that these instruments are just pressure gauges. We typically use parascientific pressure gauges, and they measure water pressure on the seafloor. And the idea is that as the depth of the volcano's surface changes, the water column, the thickness of the water column above that instrument changes at the same time. And so we can correlate the changes in depth to changes in water pressure. So that's the basic idea. And that gives us vertical motion, not horizontal motion. But with a volcanic system like Axial, where there's significant amounts of vertical motion, then that's not an issue. So this began in the 1980s, and there were two instruments, two BPRs out in 1998 that were able to capture the 1998 eruption. So VSM1, which is here where my my pointer is highlighting, and then VSM2, which is further to the south. And these two instruments both captured the eruption, and that was a pretty exciting event. And after that, there was a much more cohesive push to try to do a better job at measuring the deformation over the volcano, because I think we realized that we could learn a lot if we could really study the deformation. So unfortunately, there was a gap after the 1998 eruption. These two instruments were recovered, and I'll talk about exactly what these instruments look like in a bit, but these were recovered and there were no new instruments put down. So there was a 2-year gap in the data from 1998 until 2000. And then in 2000, another BPR was put down in the center of the caldera. So right here, this instrument called the NEMO 2000 BPR, and that stayed out there for 2 years. And then after that, it was replaced. That instrument was recovered, and it was replaced with NEMO 2002 BPR. So there's only one BPR down for a number of years on the seafloor. And so the focus, when we've had a lack of instruments, was to keep something instrumented at the caldera center. So that means that the longest record that we have of deformation of the seafloor is at the center of the caldera, which is this little group here of points. And this is where we've seen consistently over the last couple of decades as the place where we see the most vertical motion within the caldera. We also realized in the time leading up and through the 1998 eruption that with using bottom pressure recorders alone, there was no way to constrain the drift of these instruments. So these instruments have just inherent drift, mechanical drift, that is indistinguishable from motion of the seafloor. So the drift causes apparent pressure changes. And these instruments are very good at monitoring. So here's some pictures of some of these BPRs, these early BPRs, and we still use these. And these are very good at measuring the rapid deformation events like an eruption. But because of this inherent drift that looks similar to long-term steady inflation or deflation, we needed some other method to constrain this drift and nail down what the long-term deformation signal was at axial seamount. So you can see these instruments. I'll just run through really quickly how they work. So we have a recording package at the front in a titanium pressure case. There's a steel plate which acts as the weight. Then there's an acoustic release mechanism here. And then you can't see it on these pictures, but there's a float package up above. So these are small moorings on the seafloor. They're dropped from the ship. They sink down to the seafloor. They sit on the seafloor and record data for a year or two. And then when we recover them, an acoustic signal from the ship causes the acoustic release to release the weight, and then it becomes positively buoyant and rises to the surface where we recover it. And so we don't know what is recorded until we've recovered these instruments. So in order to constrain that drift, we came up with this idea of using what we called MPRs, or mobile pressure recorders. And the idea there was to use an instrument package that you can see here on these lower two pictures. That is made up of a pressure gauge that's exactly the same as the BPR pressure gauges. But this is a package that is meant to be plugged into an ROV where we can stream data real time from the instruments. And then we drive these around in a survey where we measure on from benchmark to benchmark. And this began in 2000. And at that time, we put down 5 galvanized steel tripods. And you can see these galvanized steel tripods in the background. These have been sitting there for a little while, so there's a bit of rust on them. And the locations that we put them are shown in black here. So these black dots show these original 5 locations. And this was what we had for quite a few years until 2010. We had these 5 benchmarks made of galvanized steel. They were very lightweight, so we were always incredibly worried that we would bump them accidentally while trying to make a measurement on them. And if we bumped them and accidentally moved the tripod, then that was it's a bad thing for the continuity of our geodetic measurements. Luckily, we never did that, but we were always worried about it. So eventually, we replaced these in 2010 with these really heavy concrete benchmarks. So when we replaced those galvanized steel benchmarks in 2010, we also added an extra site. So we then had 6 sites. So that was in 2010. In 2011, we had an eruption, but 2 of our new concrete benchmarks were destroyed by the 2011 eruption. So we were able to then get some funds to put in some additional benchmarks, and we increased that number from 6 until 10. So we now have 10 concrete benchmarks. And the map on the right here, you can see, and I'll just let this video play, which just shows how we make these measurements using JSON, the JSON ROV. So we have each red dot shows a location of one of these concrete benchmarks. You can see that's quite a bit more, and it improves our ability to model what's going on significantly. And the procedure is that we'll drive the ROV from benchmark to benchmark, and at each benchmark, we will place the MPR on the benchmark, release it, let it record for 15 to 20 minutes, and then pick it back up and drive to the next one. And we do this over and over again over the course of a few days, making 2 to 3 measurements at least on each benchmark. And then we use the repeatability of those measurements on each benchmark to calculate what the drift of the instrument was during the survey. So we can remove the drift by assuming that there's no vertical motion during the 2 days that it takes to do the survey. These are also relative measurements, so we have to pick a reference point. So this farthest point, which is 10 kilometers from the Caldera center, we assume to have 0 motion. And that might not be exactly true, but that's what our assumption is in these surveys. So we've been doing that since 2000. And combining that with the BPR measurements has been very powerful. In late 2014, the Ocean Observatory Initiative cabled array came online, and here I've zoomed in on Axial Caldera, and you can see these blue circles indicate the location of seismometers, and the red indicates the location of the cabled bottom pressure recorders and tilt meters. So there's 4 out there right now on the cable. One of them is at the Caldera Center, where we've been making long-term measurements. So this video, I'll just let it play for a bit, shows the deployment of one of these cabled bottom pressure recorders. So that's what you see here in the video. This is the power box, the junction box, and the ROV is retrieving the cable to plug into the cabled BPR, which is sitting nearby. So we'll give it just a second so you can see how that, if you haven't seen this before, it's pretty impressive. So that's it. And then there's a level. These feet have screws on them that can be, the height can be changed so the instrument can be leveled. So it's pretty impressive. And then more recently than that, after the 2015 eruption, we were able to start putting out what we call mini BPRs. And these are these little instruments. You can see one sitting on this benchmark. In the front is the MPR, mobile pressure recorder. It's sitting there recording data during a survey. But on the back side of the benchmark is one of these mini BPRs. And these are autonomous recording packages. They're not connected to any flotation system or any releases. They're not connected to the cabled observatory in any way. They just sit there on the benchmark recording pressure. And we can leave these down for a couple of years, and then whenever we go out to do a survey, an NPR survey, we can pick these up and put new instruments down because these are battery powered. And that allows us to have now a BPR that is located at basically the same place as every benchmark. So all 10 of our benchmarks has a BPR associated with it, whether it's one of the mini BPRs, a cabled BPR, or an acoustically released mooring. And in fact, we have a couple of extra moored BPRs to expand our coverage to the north and to the west now. And we haven't had this for very long. This is fairly recent, just the last few years we've been able to have this kind of network. So this is the best coverage we've had. And we didn't have this during the 2015 eruption. So we're poised now to learn the most from an eruption that we've ever been able to. This is what the bottom pressure record looks like at the Caldera Center. And this has been pieced together from a series of bottom pressure recorders that have been deployed at the center of the caldera, as well, and that's what the blue lines that you see are, as well as MPR measurements. So these are the survey-based measurements. That's what these circles with the purple dash line. And the blue line from the bottom pressure recorders has already in this plot been corrected for drift. So we can strain the BPR on either end by measurements from the NPR surveys. And so that's how we combine these data sets. And so here we can see the 1998 eruption, which was a huge drop in the surface of the volcano, followed by reinflation. And then another drop during the 2011 eruption, followed by reinflation. And then finally, the 2015 eruption. Sorry, I didn't mean to change slides yet. And what we've seen from that is that the inflation rate has varied over time, and it appears to be somewhat repeatable in that the level of the seafloor, the elevation of the seafloor in each of the eruptions was similar. So our thought is that at least over a somewhat short period of time, the eruptions are triggered at a similar level of inflation or similar elevation of the seafloor. The 2015 eruption, we were able to model, this is from a paper from 2016, as a prolate spheroid. And if you look at this plot on the left with the A, B, and C panels, panel B, you can think of as a cutaway into the Earth that's been then folded out. So you're looking from the east towards the west within the Earth. And this gray blob is the shape and orientation of the best fitting prolate spheroid, the best fitting model for the source of the inflation. And then the panel C is looking from south towards the north. And you can see an older figure from one of Adrian's papers from 2014 that shows this underlying melt region, melt mush region. And this prolate spheroid correlates to that somehow. And the best fitting, the center of that best fitting source is actually located in this paper on the southeastern part of the caldera. Some more recent modeling from a grad student of mine, Will Hefner. He included fault slip estimates from Levy et al. And that, including those fault slip estimates, still gave a best fitting magmatic source as a prolate spheroid, steeply dipping prolate spheroid, but it moved the source to the southwest, so the other side of the caldera. So there's some level of uncertainty as to where exactly this source is and what exactly geometry is. But we're consistently getting a steeply dipping prolate spheroid source somewhere in the southern part of the caldera from that eruption. And we see similar results for post-eruption inflation. Another technique that we've been trying to start making use of is using high resolution vertical AUV bathymetry differencing to expand our coverage, our geodetic coverage. So on the little video on the left is just showing Sentry being deployed and collecting data. We've also used the Mbari mapping AUV quite a few times. So we're working closely with the Mbari group as well. So here's on the right, you can see a figure that shows the 2011 to 2014 difference. And so it clearly shows that there is inflation going on in the caldera. We have 2014 to 2015. So this spans the eruption. So this shows deflation in the caldera center as well as some of the lava flows on the surface. We have 2015 to 2016, which is too short of a time window to really see that much. And here's a figure showing 2015 to 2020. So you can clearly see the caldera in the center with inflation going on, and then the blue shows very little uplift outside of the caldera, except on some, there are some spots. So we're starting to make use of this. We're planning to do inversions of the data that are in conjunction with all the other data sets that we have. So that's our goal right now, is to start combining all of this into a single model. Unfortunately, the time windows from the earlier AUV mapping data collection times don't coincide with the MPR surveys. So it's hard to combine them if they don't occur at the same time. But here's some examples of what we expect to see. So this is a model from using only the AUV data from 2011 to 2014. And it's a similar, it turns out that the best fitting model is actually a similar steeply dipping prolate spheroid on the south eastern part of the caldera. So that's just an example. Here's an example from AUV data that spanned the eruption. And again, similar source location, steeply dipping prolate spheroid down in that southeastern corner. We can also use this technique to map lava flows, and this has been a very useful technique. So you can see, for example, on the far left, pre-2011 eruption data, in the center, post-2011 eruption data, and then when you take the difference between the two, the extrusives on the surface really pop out. So this has been a very powerful technique to use. Now, I will just say that the uncertainties in the AUV data are much, much higher than the uncertainties in the MPR data. MPR and Bpr data, we have uncertainties in our measurements, our time-lapse measurements on the order of a centimeter, whereas the AUV measurements are more like 20 centimeters. But our lateral coverage will be greatly expanded, which is going to be huge, I think, when we combine all the data sets in constraining the models. We've also, it's been hard to make use of the tilt data on the cabled instruments. We were, during the 2015 eruption, able to make use of a little bit of it and to understand it, but it's a difficult thing to understand. But if we look just at this tilt meter in the caldera center, during the 2015 eruption, we interpret this, so we have a north-south component shown in red, and then an east-west component shown in blue. We interpret this as a dike propagating to the south initially, during this first window here, and then turning around and going to the north along the rift zone. So we think that the eruption initiated on the northern part of the caldera, moved south first, and then stopped and turned around and then propagated to the north. So that's our interpretation of the tilt data. So we're hoping to make better use of the tilt data as well as we go forward. Another instrument that that's a pretty new and potentially very useful thing is the self-calibrating pressure recorder built by Glenn Sasagawa and Mark Zumberg at Scripps. And this is essentially the same quartz parascientific pressure gauges, but inside the package, this pressure case is a dead weight calibrator. So the instrument is normally measuring ocean water pressure, and then occasionally switches over to measuring the pressure from this dead weight calibration system, which is a known weight. So by doing that, the drift can be calculated and removed. So this is an absolute reference, and this could eliminate our need for going far to the south during our NPR surveys to collect a reference data site, because the reference data site could be the self-calibrating pressure recording. So we're hoping to incorporate that as well. And I'll just quickly look at some recent things that we've been exploring. So using this is an example is using data from 2 cabled pressure gauges, and this is a 3-month look at data from each of those, and the tides have been removed. But you can still see some residual signal here, these oceanographic signals that look very similar from instrument to instrument. So we have found that by differencing the 2 instruments, we can eliminate a lot of the oceanographic noise and find real geophysical signals. So that's what's shown in this bottom plot. And here is a different signal from 2015 eruption until recent. And you can see several, if I zoom in here, you can see several deflation events indicated by these red lines. And these deflation events correlate with the seismicity. Whenever there's a deflation event, seismicity, shown as these black lines on the bottom, decreases and then picks back up. And then when the next event occurs, seismicity decreases again and then picks back up. So this is very interesting. And it looks like I'm running out of time, so I'll skip over those 2 and just show you that these these events also seem to be correlated with changes in inflation rate. And you can look even after May of 2019, there was no inflation for a period of time, and then it picked back up again. So this is we're starting to now see some pretty interesting signals that we haven't ever been able to see before, and we can tie these to other geophysical data sets that can let us have a lot more detailed information about what's going on. And just to end, I'll show our current eruption forecast window. And this is changing as the inflation rate changes. So just bear that in mind. We're now expecting sometime in between 2022 and 2025, but that changes as the inflation rate changes. So this is a fluid forecast. So I'll end there, and I will be happy to take any questions, but I do want to acknowledge the support of the National Science Foundation for the funding through most of this, and the OOI Cable to Rate and their team at the University of Washington. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Scott.